This time, good. All right.
Woo-hoo.
Oh, Alicia has joined us.
And on that note, I shall welcome you all to Plainfield's Hazard Mitigation Committee meeting on March 20th. I call this meeting to order and introduction of guests and visitors. So I'm Maggie Bear, Chair.
I'm Laura Brill, member.
Tom Moltenic.
Dave Hill.
Michael Billingsley. And our guests are? Alicia, you're muted. There we go.
Alicia Weiss. Hi, y'all.
Hello, Alicia. And George is there somewhere too. Maybe not back to her computer, their computer. She got in contact with us earlier.
Was helping us
Who's
figure out some I don't know.
Huh.
Bonus pen.
maybe it came out of my pocket because I was writing and read on somebody's.
It's definitely yours.
Okay.
Alrighty, welcome everyone. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda?
Crowded as it is, I'd like to add one thing, which is, let's see, is there an extra copy of the agenda so I can? Where it says something about Molly's Falls, I want to, right after that, I want to do a little thing about Twin Fistful.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, Jen.
Hello.
Welcome, Jen.
Oh, we brought goodies tonight.
Here,
Snacks.
and they're homemade cookies, not what's on the tin.
Oh, I see. Well, I just had dinner. Going to refrain, at least for now.
Well, you didn't say you had dessert.
Well, I had dessert earlier today.
See at 8:15.
Yeah, 8:15, that's right.
Yeah. Do you want to hand the fruit to me and I'll come over without it?
And you're Laura.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Seen you once in person
Yeah.
and a couple times on Zoom.
Yeah.
And David, how are you?
All right, how are you doing?
Good. And
I'm sorry, that's not the thing I wanted to
I know
add.
that wasn't right.
That was actually part of
Out of
the
the way
budget,
here.
the thing was already on there. Hello, Francis Rose. I wanted to add something about stormwater runoff.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, stormwater runoff.
Francis Rose, right?
So,
Yeah.
strike fields,
Yeah.
then add
Oh, you have not had
stormwater. Water.
stormwater runoff in the meadow.
I thought that's what this map was gonna be.
No, no, I have it on.
Alrighty,
I have it on that.
we have an additional agenda item.
Francis Rose are homemade, well, no, you won't have them. We've already had that discussion, yes.
There is, however, dehydrated fruit, although I think these do have sugar on them, but the apricots are unsulfured.
Yes, they say sugar sweetened right on the label, so.
Convenient. Thank you, Hunger Man.
My reputation precedes me. Thank you all.
Alrighty, so, our minutes from the last meeting were emailed to everybody in membership. Does anybody have any changes to the prior meeting minutes?
I did not print them out.
That's all they were.
Did I
Did a
email
wonderful
that? I
job.
think I just emailed it to you two because,
Michael
Yeah,
sent them out
Michael
to the
sent them
group.
out.
I
Okay,
reviewed
yeah.
them and had no additions.
Yeah, he sent them out at like 12:30 in the morning when, I'm still
oh,
awake,
yeah, I did see
so.
that email. I didn't get a chance to.
Well, that was pretty early for me. I mean, somebody was commenting or sent something out at 2 yesterday morning, so.
Yeah, I'm insomniac, so it's like, oh, all right, new email. Oh, it's Michael in the minutes, okay.
So I have no change to the meeting.
All right.
Very
I
good,
have
very
no
nice,
changes
helpful
either.
minutes from my
Yeah.
perspective, Jen.
Thank you, Jen.
Oh, yeah, yes, you're welcome. It's just saying, hey, it's the equinox. I looked at the date and, yeah, so I was a little distracted, but thank you, Michael.
Alrighty, well, Michael, can you lead us into our Batchelder Dam Fund Group update?
I can. And I wanted to say that it's not going to take very long, but we are moving into a situation where we're about to submit the grant. And so there are two stages that we've gone through already, which is that the committee approved a grant which was proposed by and ultimately written by Friends of the Winooski. That grant was to pay for a consulting firm. Consulting firm is SLR Engineering, which is river and structural engineering, and they in turn worked closely. This isn't always the case, but they work closely with the state funder. So part of our regular meetings have been with the people who would actually pay for the work. And they've been watching, not just to keep us from making mistakes, but actually to suggest ways to be sure that we get the money that we're going to need. Everybody on the state towards us for everything to do with Plainfield has been extraordinarily supportive. So that's the basic ground we're working on. And then what they asked for, let me see if I can get this under here. Make this accessible to the public. The map of the area upstream of the dam. Let's see if I can do this quickly. Here's a trick. Oops, wait a minute. Zoom workplace and settings. I rehearsed this earlier so I could do it quickly. For the people who are sharing. Okay. So there's the map. And we have sets of houses that Maggie and I took responsibility for trying to get the homeowners to provide us with access to their basements. And the reason for this is that when the dam flooded, most of these homes that have colored dots were inundated in one way or another. And the structural engineer wanted to know how badly they were impacted and what kind of impact occurred, particularly in 2023, which is the worst upstream flooding.
Is it possible to close the settings window so I can see,
Oh, yeah, sorry.
see the map?
Smart move that I didn't do.
Thank you.
We've had trouble getting it to focus.
It's all good.
So it's, for those who are listening, it's going
It's
to
already an improvement.
Yeah.
Are the numbers just chronological? Are they
I assigned
identifiers?
them randomly. The colors were chosen by the engineering firm based off of priority. So the green ones were their priority, and then the yellow ones were their secondary priority.
Mhm.
And then to keep the information clear, when I provided them contact information, I numbered them myself so that I could be like, number one is, because
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
otherwise it was confusing.
okay.
So anyway, it was tricky to get into those houses and to get permission. Some of them we still have not had direct contact with the owners. Fortunately, the town treasurer lives in one of the buildings and rents the bottom, not just the ground floor, but also the basement. So because he rents it, he could let us into the basement. And that was the Plainfield hardware store, which was important to see.
Your typing is.
We also had, okay, let me get over here. So getting into the basements was accomplished. I spoke with each of the homeowners ahead of time to kind of clear the way. We got into them, this was last week on Thursday. We got into them, the dam and the structural engineer were able to take a lot of photographs, walked around the outsides. I've been providing them with photographs I took during the flooding so they could see how high the water was against the foundation. Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah, is that because of the typing, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should stop the vibrations. Good idea.
And then the next step was to try, when we were to meet, which was after that inspection took place, to try and figure out how much it costs people to have been subjected to this event. Because the dam reconstruction or removal will cost at least $1 million. And reconstruction would cost probably closer to $3 million, $3.5 million.
I'm sorry, can you give me those numbers again, the first
It's
one?
about $1 million for removal, deconstruction, and up to $3 million for reconstruction, that is repair. And the state is really only willing to destruction at this point, because it's, first of all, practical, and secondly, they have limited funds.
So the grant is from the state, it's not anything we have to worry about with the federal government?
I asked that hard question during the meeting. I said, let me address the elephant in the room. How many of these funds are already in the state's bank? How much of them
Yeah.
are already in our hands? And he said, well, actually, none of them.
Yeah,
It's
and
there.
even if they were here,
Yeah, it doesn't mean
it
anything.
doesn't mean that they would claw them back. quote
Yeah.
unquote.
Yeah, but he said they're obligated. At this
Okay.
point, they see no sign that Vermont is triggering a review of these kinds of grants. So, and we're trying to get the project actually started and funding as quickly as possible. That's why we've been meeting so frequently.
So question for clarification, you said the state would only pay for removal. When you say the state, you mean this grant
This
program?
grant that is actually handled through the State Department of
Right.
Emergency Management and their subgroup hazard mitigation. So they have a state hazard mitigation organization, and they're the people providing us with the funds. And so they want to have this portion of study completed as soon as possible, and we're hoping to see the final results within 3 or 4 weeks. Final results also include modeling of the bed of the stream, and now that the ice has gone from the surface, they're going to be back out there with a canoe, and they're going to start doing launch probes down through the silt to determine how far down the bedrock is. I asked them to do, they've already done a longitudinal study that way from the dam upstream to about here. If anybody can see my finger, well, maybe I should use a pointer. From the dam up to about here, they have a longitudinal study showing how deep it is as you go toward the dam. But they haven't done cross sections yet. So that's the next step. And then the last thing is to find out the cost. And I went to all, this is actually amazing that I was able to get everyone to cooperate, asking everybody who had damage, including Positive Pi, to provide me with approximate figures of how much they spent to repair their buildings. Regardless of the source, whether it was a FEMA individual assistance grant, whether it was FEMA flood insurance, or whether it was private insurance. And the total so far, and it's still being added to, is $200,000.
Is this the 2024 flood?
2023,
23.
yeah, the one that primarily was started at the Winooski end of town.
And you said 300,000?
200.
2, yeah, that's a big difference.
200,000. So that would allow us to do what's called a benefit cost analysis, and they would compare the hypothetical removal or rebuilding of the dam against what it would cost repeatedly to repair those houses. And that's another reason why they can't give us more money, because the benefit cost analysis would sort of be 5 events of 200,000, which would be about $1 million. In other words, that it would be justified to do a demolition, but it wouldn't be justified to do a rebuild. And I should add, for anyone who's hearing this for the first time, that we've already been told that the dam is failing, that it's cracking and leaking, and that portions of the top have been broken free. And they do not know what kind of flooding event or Marshfield Dam event would cause it to collapse, but they fear that it could collapse without warning. So the last big hurdle, which involves connecting with a former select board member, Tammy Farnham, is to determine what data exists for the south side of the bridge. This is the Main Street Bridge. The south side of the bridge is resting on concrete piers.
It's not in the
Oh, okay.
Mitigation
Is resting on concrete piers. In order to do the rebuilding of that bridge with a pedestrian walkway across it, which is new, that was only 4 years ago or 3 years ago. The people doing the sidewalk said the bridge is cracking. There's problems with it. They did coring studies to determine whether they could sink new piers to support it from the south end. So we're trying to get access to their coring studies, which will tell us whether removing the dam will in any way weaken the bridge. Because part of the cost of removing the dam also includes shoring up things that might be impacted by the
Yeah,
removal.
that's true, yeah.
So
So that's part of that 1 million grant?
that's part of that 1 million grant, which could push it up to 1.3 million.
Yeah.
They've already kind of costed it out.
And like they're willing to cover that extra 300,000?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and SLR Engineering is figuring out all these various costs and will be providing us with a budget, well, actually providing the state with a budget, a timeline, and a set of goals. So that's what we're hoping to get in April, is those three things. So that's our money that we helped get with Michelle Braun and helped her prepare that application. That's money very well spent.
Now, do they have an idea as to how the river is going to move once the dam is
Yeah.
taken out?
Yes,
Good question.
two things that they wanted me to say, actually, that they want the public to hear. Because in particular, Carlo, who owns Positive Pie, raised this exact point a couple of days ago to me. He said, he said, I felt like the dam helped keep me safe.
Yeah.
And I said, well, here's the story. Here's what we were told. The dam is impounding water. In other words, it's holding back 11 feet deep of water. That water means and it's right to the top of the dam, even when there's hardly anything water coming down the river. So any new water, let's suppose a heavy rainstorm upstream, isn't going to be held back by the dam. It's going to go right over the dam immediately. In other words, when it arrives in Plainfield, it'll go over the dam. It'll just go over deeper. So when there's a lot of water coming downstream, because the dam is holding back 11 feet of height of the water already, if there's more water coming, it just gets higher above the dam. So a lot of rain coming, as occurred in 2023, meant that the water was 8 feet above the top of the dam.
You know, I'm wondering about this. So, this was the engineer who told you this?
And also Charlie Cogbill and George Springston came down and measured the depth of water.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm wondering is because rivers naturally meander, right?
Yeah.
And that meandering will vary over time, you know, depending on floods, depending on the substrate, ledges, stuff like that. I'm wondering if anybody has done any mapping of paleo river channels, you know, the old river channels that were here before the road, before the bridge, because that would give us some indication of at least how it's meandered in the past. Now things have changed a lot, but I wonder, you know, what they know about what they can predict.
There's a Beers Atlas which I examined from 1799, I think. When Plainfield at the time had only 60 residents. And Beers Atlas shows a gorge with the river in it without a dam. And it actually has an arrow pointing or something, a little line going to it saying, good place for a dam. You know, sort of.
Well, there must have been like a cascade or something.
Yeah, there was a
Usually that's-
cascade.
Yeah.
And it's a bedrock lined channel on the north side. The probing that they're doing is to determine how much bedrock there is under the south side, which will help determine how stable it will remain. You're right. I mean, well, obviously you'd be right because you've studied this stuff, but it will want to go south.
Right.
It will want to go
Yeah, the
toward the
ledge
village.
obviously pins it against that area, right? But
Yeah.
it will move otherwise.
Yes,
Now,
But
is it more likely to move before the dam or after the dam?
when the dam is removed, well, first of all, another piece of information is that when this water that is held back by, there's the dam there, so the water that's held back by the dam will drop, depending on where you're measuring, center of channel or side of channel, from 11 to 5 feet. 5.5 feet, excuse me, from 11 to 5.5 feet. So there's a whole lot more room for the river at the bottom of the gorge. And under normal conditions, it will be coming down whatever was the ancient stream channel, which is probably going to be, because the angle of the bedrock is about 30 degrees, sloping from north to south, it will be pushing in the southward direction.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's also pinned by the road, even though we know water can erode roads.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that north side is
Well,
probably fairly immovable.
Yeah, and the bedrock, apparently, from the preliminary studies they did, is from number 3, the house number 3, down to here. So this area is underpinned with bedrock, which is what the old Beers map sort of roughly indicates. It's very low resolution.
Yeah.
the fact that it will want to be on that side, but it will be at the bottom of a gorge, our biggest concern is the undermining of properties on this
right.
side.
Yeah, and I wonder if the engineers, as part of their planning, now you said they're gonna be putting together a budget, timeline goals. Are they thinking about any ways to anchor on the south side?
I was gonna ask, are they thinking about putting like the fortification, like the blocks and such,
Yeah.
like they're
I mean, they're,
overworked
you
too?
know, that messes up the dynamics of the river too, but,
Yeah,
you know,
In this case, they're not wanting to give the river free rein,
right, well, they can't, because the
because
village
it
is
would
right there.
ultimately take away the backs of these buildings. I
Yeah.
had mentioned it would also possibly take away part of Mill
Right.
Street Park.
Yeah, that's why it has to be
I
pinned
mean,
in
it already
place.
is.
Yeah.
Cause this is the abutment that's
Right.
failing.
So there's an abutment made out of granite blocks that comes almost as far as the bridge here. And you and I and Maggie saw that parts of it would break away,
Yeah.
were breaking away. And my guess is that part of their charge, I mean, they're coming up with solutions, I can't say what they will be,
Right,
but that part of their charge would be to determine how to stabilize that bank.
yeah, because
That's
one of my concerns is if you come in a river like this, in high, fast water, you have down cutting that occurs, and then you're left with very steep walls that eventually collapse,
Yeah,
so.
and I've also spoken at length with Ann Van Koovering, whose house this one is, and that back soil there is soft, we walked it,
Yeah.
I think, and so it's likely that it will be undercut. What I'm hoping for with the cross-section studies is that they will find some bedrock down there on the other side.
Wouldn't that be handy?
That's what we hope so.
Now, will the impact of that, I mean, I recognize that we understand that the bedrock extends to roughly 3 or 4, right?
You said 3 and 10 or something?
Yeah, it's 2, 3, 4, and
2, 3, 4.
actually, it ends before, Forest's property line is here, there's a culvert right there. So it ends,
We know that, go
it ends approximately at the culvert, so it's from that part of 4 all the way to the dam.
Did they look at the impact to, the cemetery is just a bit up, right?
It's already falling in on that
Yeah.
corner.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
so-
bet it is.
So do
Actually,
we,
in meeting with the cemetery commission in April. to talk
yeah,
about
so I'm
that.
wondering if we understand or one, if there's a way to, but also if it's been discussed around the impact of that.
They're gonna go back out on a canoe in the next week or two, and they know that the impoundment presently goes 1.5 miles above the dam. So it goes almost to John Fowler
Oh,
Road,
wow, yes,
and, yeah,
the
into
potential impact.
Yeah, I actually gave them a list of buildings in Marshfield that they had not put on their list, like everything's numbered here. I said, well, what about the building that Mount Cush was
certainly.
renting, where they lost, 100 bags of hemp? And what about the next, I gave them the house number with all the multiple trailers right next to it. 7135 or something. But anyway, they're gonna assess those properties and the impact there too.
Be really nice if there could be some restoration way upstream and then mid-upstream,
Yeah.
such that the river had room to overflow, floodplain essentially.
They're talking even new plantings, like new
Yeah.
trees and stuff to
Yeah.
stabilize it.
That's good.
I mean, their river engineer, Alex, she's very hip to this stuff and talks
I'm
about
sure
it.
he knows all this stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and their structural engineer, Monica, she also is looking at the post-removal scenario as well as the present scenario. So, they're the ones who have to come up with a list of things that have to be done to protect
Yeah.
existing structures.
And I'm curious, when the dam comes out, and we have another flood like we did this past summer where that area along Route 2 just got, devastated. I wonder if that, not having the dam will protect upstream a little bit more as well. Because the water will be flowing more dramatically.
Yeah.
There won't be such an impoundment, that kind of thing.
They've done computer modeling, which is also a new thing I forgot to report. They've done computer modeling that is taking the entire depth of the stream and the river, and working with another engineering firm that provided them with preliminary data. They're adding their own data, and it goes all the way up to John Fowler Road. So the model is quite long, and it's sort of 3D, you know, in the sense that it shows the depth of the channel underneath the water surface. And they have modeled the impact with the dam removed. This has been done.
Yeah.
They've modeled the impact of a 50-year flood, a 100-year flood, and a 500-year flood, and I've seen those models. They're preliminary models, so I can't share them publicly. I'm actually waiting for them to tell me when they have a final model. I talked with them about it today, actually. When they have a final model, so I can have their permission to share it with some of the properties that are presently slated for buyout.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
one of those property owners may choose to stay if they know the dam is coming out. But I don't dare say that, because if I was to reassure them without having final accurate models, I'd be liable for whatever consequences they would
Yeah, and
experience.
there's still so much unpredictability. I
Yeah.
mean, they're modeling it, but that's,
Yeah.
you know, it's a prediction or a set of predictions.
Now,
Well, I'm
wouldn't
gonna
they
put-
have like at least some data from the last couple of years of the floods also that they could use to more accurately predict?
I'm gonna put another map up.
I think the difference, David, is that, you know, so the previous models would help if the dam stayed in place, right? But if we remove the dam,
Right, that's what I'm thinking,
Yeah,
like
that's a
they would at
major
least know
variable.
what was there and, you know, they could
Yeah.
kind of predict more just knowing what was there and how it would react without the dam and with the dam and so forth.
right, and I think those inundation maps that we've seen, you know, they look at the topography, and then they try to model what the river will do in that topography. I think that's how, you know.
I'm gonna put one of those up right now.
Yeah, I'm just figuring, yeah, if we
Okay.
had a couple of 100-year floods, they at least know what it looks like now.
Yeah.
So here's a new view. This is a view of, again, kind of fuzzy, sorry about that. I'm trying to figure out why the camera's doing that, but.
Yeah.
It's dying, it doesn't seem to be able to do it.
It's
Can you
like,
lift it up?
Yeah, so
we've tried.
I want to make sure we have the bridge and the dam, and we do have the bridge and the dam in this picture. Okay, so let me say what each of these colored lines, by the way, the bigger version of this is posted on the bulletin board over by the front wall, if anybody wanted to look at it. Yellow lines are the outlines of buildings. Yellow lines with X's on them are town-owned or state-owned buildings. In other words, they're municipal. And that includes the schoolhouse, which is a senior apartment. And it includes the fire station in the municipal building. And it includes the town hall that we're in, right here. So what the light blue line is, I have actually, the key is wrong, Francis Rose said. There's a key that says that the light blue line is a 50-year flood and the dark blue line is a 100-year flood. In fact, the light blue line is a 100-year flood and the dark blue line is a 500-year flood.
Okay, yeah.
And that makes more sense. And the houses that we're looking at upstream of the dam, this very closely, I made this map in 2017, this visualization I made in 2017, based on what then was existing FEMA data and what was existing dam inundation data from Green Mountain Power. And interestingly enough, the 500-year model that they did based on the topography just recently closely matches the dark blue line on this map. So it crossed Route 2.
Yeah.
It crossed Route 2 and filled up that valley. And it was, in fact, around all of the houses that are along Route 2 and not quite that high, though. In other words, this shows something. FEMA at that time was indicating something more of an extent of flooding in 500 years than in fact happened. But it gives you an idea of what our,
It did come up higher on this side.
yeah, it goes across the cemetery to answer something Don was saying.
Yeah.
Now that's without taking into account that the dam is in place.
Right.
And it's taking into account that that's just river flooding.
Yeah.
If you add Marshfield Dam flooding to it, then you go to the yellow line and the red line. So there are two kinds of floods, and this is based on their modeling for us. In other words, Green Mountain Power provided us with these contours.
Yeah.
So part of the reason that this committee exists, from my perspective, is try to figure out how to solve this so people are more safe, because this is a terrible scenario. It really brings a lot of people into repeated risk.
Yeah.
And we want to reduce this risk. So hopefully the dam removal will give the river more room downward,
Yeah.
which in turn means it backs up less against the dam and doesn't push over the banks as much. That's what we're hoping. So I know there's going to come a time if they recommend that we remove the dam and here's how we can do it and here's the money. The next step is to go with the select board and create a town meeting where we all sit down together and explain it to the population, because as most people are aware, if you've lived here any period of time, the dam is identified with Plainfield's identity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so give it a plaque and, you know, a little pedestal and, you know, there you go.
So,
People get very emotional about it, just in the little bit of conversations I've had here and there, so.
Yeah,
Right.
you know, they can be emotional all they want if it's
Yeah.
gonna damage everyone else's property.
yeah, I can
Well,
almost tell
yeah,
you who's
the
gonna be the
reality
most
is-
vocal.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that's my presentation on this stuff, which has already taken much more time than we allocated.
But, yes.
You are only 2 minutes over.
Oh, really?
So you did really well.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's with a
so
bunch of
maybe-
questions, that ain't bad.
Anybody have any questions either online
So,
or?
yeah, George is asking, are there measures on the slate to ensure boating access in the village?
Oh.
Behind the co-op, where the,
There won't be any place to boat if we take the dam out.
and there we are, yeah.
Yeah,
Cause the velocity will be too high, right?
it'll be a cascade through the center of town. I try to encourage people to look at Moortown. There was a dam removal in Moortown in 1940 something, and it was a mill dam that was used in conjunction with their clapboard factory. And I've talked to people who were alive back then I went over to Moortown and talked to, about that. And their recollection is it was a really nice dam, but it tended to increase flooding sideways into the village. And Moortown was very badly damaged every time there was high water. When they removed the dam, that danger went away. And it gave instead a series of pools and cascades down through the center of town, which is
Yeah.
now a tourist
Yeah,
attraction.
it's gonna be beautiful.
So we're hoping this will be equally nice to look at, especially the bedrock part where it's going to be a cascade. The engineers actually talked about this just the other day and said there is silt on top of the bedrock now, but most of it will be washed away.
They also, I think, you had asked the question, David, but in our preliminary discussion, they had said that they don't, right now, they don't predict any impacts below the dam either, so.
Any impacts?
Below the dam, like by
Impacts to the
removing the
stream
dam,
bed?
yeah.
Like, would it cut across like, the baseball field and the playground and all that? Like, that's,
Their preliminary assessment was that it was not going to impact.
As yet, I would say.
It might do what, like when the Winooski flooded in 2023, it very much changed around the rec field.
yeah.
How much, what we used to call the beach, remember?
Yeah.
It went, it disappeared, it's gone.
It's gone.
So, that part of the world where the Great Brook meets the Winooski is a constantly changing landscape. Every time there's high water, it looks different after.
Yeah. And that is more the nature of rivers than not.
Yes.
They do change.
That's the fun of rivers.
That they meander, they move. Okay,
All right.
well, that was a fascinating conversation. Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be many more about this.
We love a good dam combo.
That damn conversation just keeps coming back again.
Alrighty, Michael, do you want to lead into the
Oh,
Molly's Falls Dam EAP
Okay.
update?
Part of that's just a report. As Tom may have more to add because he's been going through the EAP looking for flaws and weaknesses. So I'll say my part and then Tom hopefully will be able to add more. The emergency action plan, because I'm now on the State Dam Safety Committee, I can also talk to other emergency management directors in other towns and talk about what they have in hand for emergency action plans, particularly working with Chittenden, which is very similar to us. Rutland and Chittenden are downstream of a reservoir even bigger than Molly's Falls. And we want to successfully go the path that they went, which is to say Green Mountain Power gives us better information, works with us more closely. They've been very resistant so far, and there's very nice people I like talking with them, but they are constrained from some reason within the company from giving us good data. So now we are at a point where we have a brand new emergency action plan, which Tom has had a copy of. And that has all new maps as well. Some of the deficiencies of which I talked about in a meeting about 4 months ago, where I showed the prior inundation maps were actually better in some ways. The new ones don't show where the roads are. And so I went back to them and I said, we can't possibly, I talked to our fire chief too, Matt Johnson, and I said, we can't possibly plan an evacuation or plan an emergency response to something we can't see. And you folks can create the maps that would allow us to see. So they said, yeah, we'll do it. And that was 2 months ago and nothing has appeared. So I've gotten back to them since in the past week and spoke to Laura Vallette, who was one of the people who spoke with us, and said, Laura, you said 2 months ago you were going to help us get better maps, and that Kleinschmidt, and she, by the way, on the phone with me when we talked about this 2 months ago in January, she said, it's going to cost a lot of extra money to have these extra maps made. And I said to her, my follow-up letter, I said, are you saying that Green Mountain Power doesn't have the money? So,
Yeah, looking at my electric bill, they do.
yeah. So I'm pretty sure, because I copied her boss, Josh, I copied Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, and I copied Tom into that email. So she knows she's being watched. So she said, I'll get on it. You know, like that was a couple of days ago. She said, I'll get on it. I'll do it. I'll find out what we have to do.
So did you ask her only to add roads or any other features?
I asked her to make the underlying details of what it is that's being flooded easier to see.
So landscape features?
No, the housing. The actual houses aren't visible.
Oh, okay.
And that's really hard for us to plan evacuation if we don't see the houses. Meanwhile, Josh Coven, who spoke to us last month,
Keith
had,
Coven. Keith Coven.
Yeah.
Keith Coven, yeah, sorry, Keith Coven, had done a preliminary assessment and said he could provide us with maps that had housing locations on it based on Green Mountain Power. And I sent him, did you see the Marshfield map I sent out?
No, I did not. What?
It was a Google link.
Okay.
It was too big to send by email.
Okay, yeah, I think I did look at that. Yes.
I made this map for, as I said, for Plainfield back in 2017, but I didn't make a similar map for Marshfield. But then the Marshfield Emergency Management Director at the time, whose name is Tom McClay, asked me to make a map like this one for Marshfield. In other words, a map that shows where the houses are. So taking the inadequate data from Green Mountain Power, the request is that I produce a map that would be clearer. So I went back to Google Earth, because that's where you see the houses. And I found that when I zoomed back to include all of the town of Marshfield, it was so low resolution, it was less helpful than it could be. So what I did instead is I zoomed in so you could see the cars in the driveway basically. And I made something like 20 different individual screenshots. And then I put those screenshots together as tiles. You know, I overlapped them and made them fit and ended up with a map of Marshfield, a highly detailed map of Marshfield from the old schoolhouse Carmen, which is where the town government is, all the way up to the top of Route 2, where it used to be called the Water Tower Farm, where the Rhythm of the Rain people are on Route 2. Because there's a culvert up there that would be washed out if the dam had a release. It would be impossible to travel out of Marshfield in the Danville direction because of that. And so I sent that map to Keith, and Keith somehow is going to figure out how to overlay that with the GIS data so that we can see the areas highlighted where the road can't be passed in a flooding situation, where he's going to put all the inundation lines on it like I did for this. And hopefully there'll be a planning map that Marshfield and Plainfield together can use, because Marshfield and Plainfield have a mutual aid fire department situation, very tight. I mean, they work almost as one unit. So the 2 fire departments can plan evacuations in high priority, middle priority, low priority, and get people out. So that's my part of this. And what did you see, Tom?
Yeah, a number of things. So I mean, something that, you know, you talked about, we talked about here, and that you brought up is in terms of the current structure of their emergency release, and that is essentially an irreversible until the flooding event passes, that there's no coming back from that until they're able to reinstall new brake logs.
Yeah.
And a question that hasn't been asked is like, what is the timeline on that, right? Like, do they have replacements of the emergency, like how quickly would they be able to reestablish the emergency release?
Not during the event.
Well, certainly,
Yeah.
and then after, it's a matter of like sourcing and
And I should say for everyone's benefit that the stack of logs that forms the gate is creosote or whatever the substance is, they're treated logs.
Yeah.
Would that theoretically be able to be reused?
No,
No.
it would be
Okay.
tumbled
They'd be
far
down,
the
Right.
street.
they'd be somewhere
Yeah,
down
I-
in,
I figured, you know,
Yeah.
might make it easier for them to
you,
reestablish it, but.
you can't believe the force of water that will come out. It starts at the bottom because the bottom log is the first one to go out. And so there's 6.5 feet of water times 337 acres that's backed up behind that gate. And the first log that is released, once they lift the iron supports that hold it in place, when the first log that comes out is gonna go like that horizontally, who knows, maybe a quarter of a mile. And then the other ones will drop in and go like that. They'll all be blown out until the whole gate is open, and they'll end up in East Montpelier. You know, and so they have to wait for the lake to come down completely to the bottom, and then once it's dry, I
Well, to
guess,
the lip of the,
Right,
yeah, to the lip of the spillway.
yeah.
yeah, 340 long feet or something like that.
My guess, Tom, is that they don't have a stack of new stop logs somewhere.
Right, and so then it's, you know,
Yeah.
you get another major flooding event, or, you know, extended flooding event,
Yeah.
that the impact of that initial release may be a much more extended
Mhm.
impact.
But that first release would be like a fire hose.
Yeah.
Right, and then once the
Yeah,
level
a
goes
wall
down.
of water.
Yeah, so even if they didn't replace that gate right away, you know, if the lake came up, there would be a trickle initially, you know, over that release gate. And it would only be in the event of another massive, you know, rain event, I
Right,
think.
that you would have significant,
Right,
amounts of water flowing
Yeah.
through that
it's
emergency.
kind of a moot point, because that first release,
Yeah, he's gonna do a lot for a while,
right.
and then take a good
But that's a
amount of time
really-
to build up.
that's an interesting point, that, you know, if that happens, then what's their plan for, you know,
Reloading.
regaining
Yeah.
flood control?
They don't talk
Although
about
once
it.
the gate is open, the lake is empty, right? Mostly.
No, it's not empty, because there's an earthen dam that goes, you know, the lake bottom is here, the earthen dam goes up here, where the gate is, and then the gate backs up more water, right?
Gotcha.
So that much will go down, but there'll still be this much of the water in the lake basin.
Yeah.
So
And
it won't
however
empty.
much is coming in is just continuing to come over.
So the two
Yeah.
different lines, the flood lines on the map, one is the breach of the gate opening, and one is the.
They actually haven't given us a map for when the gate opens. That's what I'm trying to get from them. They've given us a map for, there's 2 kinds of dam disasters that they plan for. One is called a sunny day breach, and that means that when there's no rain coming out of the sky, somehow or another the dam fails. It could be because a crack opens up and it starts to leak, and then the leak turns into a head cutting, and the whole dam gradually comes apart. It also could be, and this is something that I presume they've allowed me to say, is that if somebody does a terrorist act, where they try to destroy the dam deliberately with a bomb or something. So that's called a sunny day breach, and that's the lesser amount, the light blue. And then the in design flood, which is IDF is the initial they use. IDF flood is a maximum rainfall event that they plan for. And it includes also the fact that the Winooski is flooding because there's a lot of rain coming. So it's an added, that's why the purple line is so much greater, because it's not just the fact that the dam is releasing water, but there also is water in the Winooski River. There's another flood that they have not, they used to map. Back in 2015, I had a map of an emergency release. Now they're not mapping it anymore. So that's what I specifically asked Laura Villette for is, please, can you give us an inundation map from emergency release? So that would be a line that may be the same as the purple line, but for 15 minutes, maybe 20, maybe a half an hour, when the first burst comes out, I already know from an earlier statistic that the water level in the middle of that's beyond the in design flood, the water level in the middle of Marshfield will be 11 feet higher. 11 feet, in other words, when that big boom comes down, they blow out the gate and a big crest of water comes through. Initially, it will be 11 feet higher. I said, that's gotta be mapped. We have to know. When we're evacuating people, we have to be aware of how much wider the river was. I said, even if it's for 15 minutes, it's gonna be taking houses right off their foundations.
Oh, yeah.
And
closing off access for.
And
any
throwing
sort of
cars downstream
evacuation,
and-
any sort of
yeah.
response.
yeah, I mean, even Roy Schiff, when he was on when we had the Batchelder Dam, he said he didn't think our dam would withstand that impact. In other words, when that emergency release came downstream, he thought that would destroy the Batchelder Dam in the
I
middle
think
of
it
the
probably
village.
would, yeah.
So that's to add to our misery. This is the map of their map, the most recent one, with my additions and changes. I added the streets, so you can see where the streets are. Those are the white lines. And the yellow building surrounded by black are the town buildings again. That's the old schoolhouse common. That's the fire department, both of which are right in the middle of the floodplain. And a number of streets, Gilman Street in particular, and great deal of Route 2 are impassable because they're flooded.
So I'm wondering, Michael,
As well
if,
as our wastewater pools.
Oh, that's right.
yeah. Are you folks familiar with Vermont Interactive Map Viewer?
Yeah, yep.
I've got it queued up right now, and you can see the village, you know, you can see the roads, whoops.
Yep.
And the houses, all the buildings, so you can blow it up, bring it down, you know, add different, you know, contours and landforms and natural features and stuff like that. So that could be a source of some visuals.
Keith is going to do that.
Yep.
Okay, that's
And,
right.
Keith, I asked Keith not to just do Plainfield. It's because, again, it's a mutual fire department situation,
Yeah,
to do all the way up to Marshfield Village and beyond. So he's going to take that and all the contours, and hopefully, he told me about this. He sent me the link to it.
yeah, it's a great tool.
You know, since,
And it shows parcels too, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
all good.
it has boundaries, you know, boundaries for parcels, land parcels and stuff.
Yeah.
Since with like the 2023 flooding, it basically cut off Route 2 on either side. Is there an alternate route to get people out of Marshfield that doesn't involve Route 2?
Well, they can go up Depot Road,
Question.
which is for people on the south bank.
Yeah.
They
which
can
is-
go
I
up,
live at the top of
Yeah.
Depot, and then you have Bean Road, which then eventually merges with essentially the rail trail into Groton, and then in the opposite direction, you have the rail trail, the Wells River Rail Trail,
Yeah.
that runs on the ridge line primarily into, it comes out, you know, just northeast of the Plainfield Co-op. It runs behind Twinfield School, but you do have other waterways that then pretty consistently wash out. So if you're headed towards the Groton direction, which is something that I was gonna say as far as like this inundation map is specific to the Winooski, specific to the impacts of the dam, but in a major flooding event, you have, even just right here, you have the impact of the Marshfield Brook water system, which extends basically all the way to Groton. And in that major flooding event, that's where those 2 waterfalls are. And those were at capacity and washing out down Upper Depot. That whole road was completely washed out. And then on the lower side, Lower Depot was able to be recovered to be passable pretty quickly. But like all of those, you know, tributaries and all of those waterways have all of their own, you know, effects that aren't quite caught on this.
Yeah, and on the north side, you have Creamery Brook coming down next to
Exactly,
Creamery Street,
exactly.
which is, makes it hard for people on the north bank of the Winooski to move away from the center of town. They probably, I mean, what I've been telling people here, in other words, if I do public notification and emergency management, is they say, whatever you do, go uphill. Get away from where you are, know your route. And in many cases, people will probably end up in that church that's in the rise, you know, of Route 2 in the center of
Oh,
town.
yeah.
Yeah, the Unitarian.
It's the only public building that would be above the water.
Or even that took, flooded from above, of just in 23, of just the rain event in Marshfield, and the elevation above behind the church
Yeah,
flooded in, and that whole kitchen on the backside was flooded.
no kidding.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very daunting for Marshfield.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you took more notes. I'm sorry we've
No,
gotten
no,
off
not
into
at
the
all.
weeds.
It's all useful, information, and yeah, I mean, as far as, Marshfield as a whole, from the town government side and from the kind of folks banding together to say, this is gonna keep happening, what are we doing? Yeah, there is a significant recognition that, one, you have significant islands that will be created. And so having discussions around like block captain kind of systems where we can say, you're gonna be isolated, check on your people and report, because we may or may not be able to get there, and we'll have to figure out who in our area can get to you. If Cabot is able to come around, if Calais is able, you know, if East Montpelier is able to come through Calais and support people up on that ridge line, but on this ridge line, we're gonna have to find some other solution.
There are also, evacuations can be accomplished by some high water vehicles. In other words, the fire truck has 1.5 foot clearance.
Yeah.
It can go through water as long as the culverts aren't blown out.
Right.
But what we don't, I mean, like for instance, just, there, other things happen, of course, in the context of flooding. People have heart attacks, buildings still catch fire, and all these other things that might require an emergency response. I think when we spoke last, I mentioned the helicopter rescue for the woman who had the heart attack the morning of our 2023 flood. And similar things could happen again. So, question about the fire department's own equipment.
Yeah.
On this map, that's the fire department. It's the bottom of a hill.
Yeah.
So, whoops, I guess yeah, there we go. It's at the bottom of a hill. And so that would be, I think, just from river flooding, and it would be potentially very badly impacted from a dam, but certainly from a dam point of view, dam release or dam failure, it would be blown. So they'd have to get all of their trucks and any excavators they have parked around the place and stuff, they'd have to get it to another location. Have you thought of where they could go?
Yeah, so I live, essentially, if you're familiar with Dennis Ducharme's property at the corner of Upper Depot and Lower Depot,
I was just up there
The
yesterday, I
logging.
mean Wednesday.
used to be a pretty substantial logging operation.
Yeah,
He has, because of the logging, he has a lot of marshaling area for heavy equipment, and has held all of his heavy equipment, as well as the recently improved rail trail parking area that's up there. And then there is also on Dennis's property, because he has essentially a fire pond, but there's a, I forget what they call them, but a pump, for the fire department.
Mhm.
Dry hydrant.
Yeah, exactly, a dry hydrant, thanks.
So let me point out on this map where the area we're talking about is at the top of Depot Road.
Good thing you're paying attention. Mike.
Didn't you all say that Marshfield Village would have 2.5 minutes in the event of a dam release?
Excuse me?
Of an emergency dam release, yeah. Now, there would be, that part of, sorry.
Well, just the clarifying question is, I'm hearing, let's get all the equipment to high ground in the event of a dam release. Oh, this was just high water. This is like a rain flood event.
This is like 2023.
Yeah, I mean, they had a bad flood in 2023 as we did too. They
Okay,
lost
so
their
there's
sewer
more
treatment.
warning than the 2.5 minutes.
Yeah.
That was my disconnect.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
my disconnect.
So
So-
they would alert when the regular spillway was opened.
Yeah,
So the fire department and everybody would have that information to then
So they would have more.
continue to
notice.
start,
Yeah, so
yeah.
part of the EAP is a cascade of notifications at various color codes of whether it's an orange event or a red event. And the expectation is that there's some time, right, totally dependent upon the actual weather event, but that there is a decent amount of time that is communication through that established kind of phone tree, notification tree. But also there are some issues with that as far as like the correct people, and then also like responsibilities beyond just like municipal authority, right? And so we're having discussions as far as like our LEMP and like, hey, that's great. Their EAP says you're gonna be notified. Our emergency action, book says these people will be notified, but like, who really needs to know? This is like it's a document to fulfill a statutory requirement. That is all well and good, but let's actually gather community involvement to say like, who needs to know, and is it?
By the way, Tom, we're later in this meeting, not, again, with too much time because it's the first conversation, but talking about the transition from an emergency management plan for the town to an operations plan for each particular disaster. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's like the guy, our road foreman, our town clerk, our select board, a lot more people that are on the EAP, because it's our own structure of communication and connection and collaboration that we want to build to, if there's a fire coming in from the west of town and it's moving toward the center of the village, what do we do first, second, third, and fourth?
So are you saying, Michael, that there's an overall LEMP? That's a new acronym for me.
Yeah,
And then from that, so that might have some guidance
yes.
for then how you respond to each event that
Right.
comes along.
The LEMP only names the personnel
Right.
and the names of the institutions. In other words, it's very structural, but it's not action-oriented. And it names all the vulnerable populations. So it has Twinfield on it, it has Spruce Mountain Inn, it has, for Plainfield, it has the schoolhouse, the old schoolhouse senior housing is vulnerable. Maple Hill School.
Is there a
Goddard College.
template that towns like Plainfield, Marshfield use for a LEMP?
Yeah, we not only have to do it annually and update it even more frequently if it changes, but it actually, and it's my responsibility to, when I do it, it makes the town eligible for a higher degree of match on funds for grants. In other words, there's a carrot and a stick with that.
And there must be an agency that is tied to that, like what state agency?
Vermont Emergency Management.
Okay,
The state, which is the people I'm talking with every day during a disaster. They're kind of my next level up is a regional coordinator from emergency management, and then who I answer to directly, and then the state emergency management organization above that. Okay, so
We do have a time check.
yeah.
so what we're hoping, if I'm not mistaken, this will help you too, Tom, is that in some reasonable period of time, hopefully I'll even be told what that period of time was within the next week, Green Mountain Power will add another layer of maps and will improve the maps that they provided us. And that'll make our planning a whole lot easier. Are you in contact with Justin a whole lot?
Yeah, he lives right on Gilman Street. I see him with some regularity, but not a ton, but.
But in the sense of, just like this committee works with me, you could take the same work of this committee and work with him?
Yeah, yep,
Okay.
absolutely.
He's the emergency management director for Marshfield, it's Justin Campbell.
Yep, and Chris Whalen, who's a little bit of an update if you didn't see, Chris Whalen became a select board member last year for 3 years. He's quite interested and engaged as far as like facilitating our community engagement in this planning, in support of Justin, but also in support of the kind of mutual aid efforts that are going on. And then Michelle Gonzalez, who had been a select board member for quite a while.
Yeah.
She is moving to Albuquerque.
Oh,
And Rich Baker, who had previously
I know
been
Rich
for quite
quite,
some
yeah.
time.
okay.
He took a year, maybe 2, off to deal with health issues, but then he was voted back in
good.
as a select board member, so.
Good,
And
good.
Rich is my neighbor, Justin lives down the road,
Yeah.
and Chris Whalen lives on Bean Road, so we're
That
we're
sounds
all,
like-
we're all on the south
So you
uphill
guys are gonna be
side.
fine.
And so
Yeah,
there's a necessity to
Well,
address the
this-
concerns of everyone else.
this lays the groundwork for the extra piece I added to the
Yeah.
agenda, which is
So,
how,
yeah.
which is how this affects Twinfield,
Twinfield, oh, Twinfield School,
Twinfield School, yeah.
yeah.
So this, again, another blurry image, at least for the people looking online, it's blurry. We can see the actual paper, so it's not blurry. But this is the same inundation map. And I actually brought one for Francis Rose, so let me give you that, so you have your own copy.
Thank you.
The downstream is below the bottom of the map, upstream is at the top. So the water is flowing in this direction. And again, because Green Mountain Power didn't do it, I added the roads. So the roads are in white. And the other thing is Green Mountain Power put their map stitching tool directly over the school. So this thing that says matching line,
Yeah,
there's another map that's the next one closer to Plainfield that's supposed to be, sort of superimposed with this. Both of them cover the school completely. It doesn't speak well to the fact that they want us to be thinking about the school in relation to inundation mapping. But what I hope this shows clearly enough is that the purple line, which again is the IDF flood, comes partly up the entry road to Twinfield. So that's this road right here, and it goes underwater during a high, the highest water flooding event that they would have a dam incident during. And also completely covers Route 2 from past the uphill, past the Naismith Brook Bridge, all the way toward Plainfield and goes on beyond that, way almost around to Martin Meadows. So there's this huge section that's underwater in the Plainfield direction. So
And what are the red lines? What are the red lines?
the red lines are cross sections where they have done topography. In other words, shown what, you could go to a chart that they
I
made
see.
of numbers that show the
Section.
elevations as you go along the red line.
Section, got it.
It's a mapping tool. And the yellow thick lines are where a bridge is.
And Michael, it's also not necessarily taking
That's a
into
bridge.
account
I guess the road
the
didn't get written in there.
upstream impact of the Naismith
That's
Brook.
a driveway.
Yeah.
Right, this is
Driveway,
Winooski
It's a private bridge.
inundation
Yeah,
versus
right, I know
the
where that
actual,
is.
like,
Yeah.
what
Right.
the Naismith Brook is doing
yeah,
and what the impact of that is downstream of that.
yeah. I mean, we definitely identified here in committee that Naismith Brook was the biggest contributor to our 2023 flood. So this huge delta, this V-shaped delta that points uphill here, goes to Naismith Brook, which continues in this is that dark line. So
It's in there somewhere.
Naismith Brook, this picture that's underneath their map, this is, again, Green Mountain Powers, this picture is it's pretty old. It doesn't show the devastation that Naismith Brook did in 2023. It's not on this picture. So this gorge is actually open so much that you don't see a dark line through the woods. Instead, you just see raw exposed earth in more recent images. That's not even taken into account. Naismith Brook is not. So this is just the Winooski backing up into that valley on the Twinfield direction. So basically what it means, just so that you don't have to speculate, is getting students and staff out of that building long before this happens. If there, let's say at 10 o'clock in the morning, there's a heavy rain and it increases in an unpredicted way, which is the nature of rain right now. And we're told by Green Mountain Power that the reservoir is rising to the point they might have to open the service spillway and increase the flow to the Winooski. At that point, got to get everybody out of that school. So I'm working on that with, right now with Goddard, but as of the end of this week, tomorrow and Monday, hopefully we'll start, once let me back up. Our fire chief, Jonathan Matthew, and I have collaborated on how to get the kids safely out of the school. The prior plan, which is the best that anybody could think of, given the lack of buildings to go to, was to have them go to the old schoolhouse common, which I just showed you in an earlier map, is surrounded completely by water. It also means, eventually, it also means getting there means going along portions of Route 2 that dip down and end up being underwater. So the last thing I thought ought to happen is that the students be taken in toward Marshfield. So what we're working on instead is having them go briefly cross, before the river comes up, obviously, briefly cross, go up the hill this far, and then take Eaton Cemetery Road, the tiny little bit of which is showing in one corner. Eaton Cemetery Road, up to Hollister.
Cemetery.
Okay.
Cemetery, yeah. And then up to Hollister Hill Road.
Those at home, it's this one right.
Now, some of that isn't paved.
As
Would
we
the
know.
buses be able to handle that
Well-
in such an event?
Yeah,
And the buses don't park at the school, do they?
no.
Yeah, I thought they
The
did.
buses have to
Do
get to
they?
this, the
Okay.
buses, many of the bus drivers need to come back to the school.
Right, so they'd have to be called back,
They have to be called back.
yeah.
So
And
the
that's,
buses are there, but not the drivers.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
yeah, so the drivers have to be called back to the school, which is another thing we're working on, is improving the emergency communication system there. But getting the drivers to the school means their route would be not to head toward Marshfield, but up the hill on the other side of Route 2. And then to go over, I mean, this is at the beginning of a rain event, David.
All right.
Not after culverts start washing out and everything. So getting them up there to Hollister Hill Road and then over to Taylor Farm Road, which connects to 214, excuse me, and immediately drops them at Goddard. Goddard has agreed tentatively, which is going to be worked out actually tomorrow. We have a meeting scheduled with the facilities director, sitting down with a building map, to go to the Pratt Library, which is a big brick building on the campus, which has 2 floors and an elevator, although it's not working right now. But it would allow students in wheelchairs, for instance, to have access to the lower floor. It's not ideal. It's not a great deal of space for 450 people, because that's how many, when you take the 350 students and 100 staff.
Is the hay barn not adequate for a specific reason?
They did not offer it.
Interesting.
It was the old destination. I and the prior emergency management director had worked out an evacuation plan to go to Goddard back in 2015, not by this route, but coming back on Route 2 at the time. But Hay Barn and the Clock House, which is adjacent to it, were all broken up into sections, so every single classroom knew which room in the Hay Barn to go to so that they can meet their parents. What we're doing instead is trying to create a similar map for Pratt, which I'm going to be doing with the principals. That's going to be their job to decide how they want to do the reunification part. But to get ourselves, first of all, get everybody safely out to a place that's dry. And they might be standing next to each other, you know, they might be sitting on the floor. It's not going to be really cool, but it's going to be big enough to hold 200 on each floor roughly. And it'll give a place, because also that destination is a place where the parents can get to, without going on Route 2. In other words, if they get out in time, before the river gets really high, they can drive up the Callis Road.
Yeah.
They can come down Route 14 to 214 and go to Goddard. To get their kids, hopefully get back home safely. It's gonna be very dicey. I mean, we already know that everything's a problem. And one last thing I'll share that is brand new, is that in talking with the owner of Goddard, who did make this offer directly to me on the phone, he was in Mexico last week and we talked about it, is that I don't believe that the Pratt is going to be available for very long. In other words, starting this construction season, as they start to get committed people to lease buildings on the campus to use for different things, I have a feeling he's been thinking about that as becoming a new kind of senior residence facility. That's the tentative plan. So even though he's making the offer, I presume it's time limited. So an even less desirable destination, but certainly better than the old Skillhouse Common, is the Grace Church in the middle of our village, which can be gotten to by exactly the same route. It's just that you come down to Route 2 and come into the village here.
Is that capacity?
It's gonna be very tight,
Fill the pews.
but it's a big church and it has 2 floors and it has an elevator between the floors, so,
But in the event of a flood,
Yeah, is
you're
it
talking
even gonna be
the church
accessible?
right down here,
yeah, it's not flooded.
it doesn't get flooded?
No, it is in the inundation zone. There's so many problems to solve.
Yeah.
It's in the inundation zone. If I go back and show you the Plainfield map, it's in the inundation zone for the IDF flood.
IDF,
Yeah, and presumably also for the emergency release.
yeah.
One of the Plainfield homeowners actually wrote me an entirely independent inquiry this morning saying, by the way, I know where I have to be if the Great Flood floods, but is my home gonna be safe if the dam is released?
Yeah.
Or if there's,
Or if it's removed, you mean?
no, he's talking about
Oh,
the Marshall.
Molly's Falls, yeah.
The Molly's Falls Dam. And I sent him an
Yeah.
inundation map. I said, your home is going to be in the inundation zone. It's,
Well, that's, you know, I think this is one of the challenges for people, for me and for the public, is to understand that we're saying, if this, then that, if this, then that, you know, it's like there are different grades of flooding.
Well,
And
and
Would
it's
it be
also that,
possible to get like a, kind of an emergency building to go to with that, settlement, like village they wanna build up on,
Oh, the
East Hill?
village extension.
Yeah,
integrate
Would it be
that
some-
into the plans?
Yeah.
Where
Ah,
you say,
that's interesting.
hey,
because that's out of the zone, whereas getting to the church would be a lot harder.
it would certainly lend credence to the, like, value to the town for the broader project of saying part of the give and
And
take
you'd
in
be
all
able to
this is
build it
the
in terms
establishment
of,
of.
You'd be able to make it a lot more customizable and build it to what you need instead of having to try to wedge it into the church or Goddard or wherever.
But it may be a couple of years off. or
Right,
several.
but,
I
you
would
know,
also
still
just-
it's,
I should also
long-term.
add that the tentative plan, this is tentative because everything's still being talked about publicly and changed and moved, but there is a big community building being planned for that too. It's not just individual homes. And it would have senior housing on the upper floor, but presumably some kind of large open community space on the ground floor. The other option that I've always been exploring and was working on as far back as 2018 was which Maple Hill School is also a secondary destination. But that's more for actual evacuation. Remember, school evacuation and reunification with parents is an hours-long event. It ends on the day of the actual flooding. People get their kids, they go back home, which is a very different situation than people whose homes are endangered, they have to leave for days, and that's a different kind of shelter. So, anyway, I don't want to beat this to death, but if there are any questions, we could move to the next
So
thing.
I'm wondering, so preparing Plainfield's 25, LEMP, well, have you guys thought through a process for that? Is it,
Well, I will do that. I mean, I will prepare
Okay.
the LEMP, but attached to the LEMP are what are called annexes. And there's one annex for each identified vulnerable population. So I could add extra annexes for other things as well, but I'm been focused on trying to get a plan. Twinfield has said that they are close to having a final plan, for instance. I've had a plan annexed from Maple Hill School, and I'm helping Spruce Mountain Inn do their plan. And Goddard was working on a plan, but then they stopped being a college. So they don't have a vulnerable population that needs to be specifically planned for right now. So the LEMP itself, we don't need to ask the committee to work on. There is something bigger than that, which is called a hazard mitigation plan, the town's hazard mitigation plan. Well, actually, there are two things, but the hazard mitigation plan is done every 5 years. That looks at and talks in paragraph length ways about what our vulnerabilities are and how we, and it has something to do with the hazard ranking thing we talked about here, you know, like what's the worst possible thing that could happen. And then the next worst, and the next worst, and the next worst, and the most likely. So that will be part of the emergency, the hazard mitigation plan.
So the LEMP is a subset of the hazard mitigation plan?
It's a thing done annually. The LEMP is done annually. It's done by a template. It's just a form you punch in data. I mean, I get the template from my regional coordinator and I fill it out and send it back.
Is it considered part of the hazard mitigation plan, or are these
No.
two separate?
They are two separate documents.
Okay.
The hazard mitigation plan is kind of exhausting to do. It took me 4 months to working with
can
with the hazard mitigation committee and the select board. It took me 4 months to do the last time I was emergency management director. The next person who was emergency management director, who was a select board member, if you don't have an emergency management director in a town, a select board member has to be it, was a select board member, and she basically copied the earlier one with very few changes. A new one would have to be more intelligently addressed in the sense of looking at real life stuff we've learned in the last two floods, plus increased forest fire danger.
And when is
When's
the
that?
End of pandemic.
It's 2025 to 2026. It depends on each town. I can't remember our exact anniversary. I think it's May 2026
for the hazard mitigation?
for the hazard mitigation plan.
Okay.
But we should start working on it soon.
Yeah.
And so I'm just putting that out as a heads up. And then the other last piece, which is mostly town employees would work on, but I would want the committee to help me remember stuff, is the, sorry about this acronym thing, but the Emergency Operations Plan, EOP, which is disaster specific for town staff and town select board and town volunteers. It says, if there's this kind of event, people go right to the shelter, who are volunteers at the shelter. The road crew immediately starts telling me, the emergency management director, which roads have to be closed. So I, in turn, would then ask somebody who's doing the public notifications to say, you can't go up Brook Road now.
Yeah.
You know, it's all that kind of stuff. That's the emergency operations plan. So this is just my heads up by throwing it into the agenda
So
today.
does that need to be revised as well? And if so, when?
It hasn't been done.
Oh, it hasn't been done?
We have no emergency
Okay.
operations plans whatever. And
Not
that has,
in existence.
yeah, and
as of
that in part was due to a fairly longstanding lack of communication between the fire department and the emergency action.
And is there a template for this?
No,
No template?
no, every town does its own, the way it feels like it best does. I mean, Tom, you'll be working on yours, I imagine, for Marshville.
Yeah, it was something that was kind of discussed as a target prior to, we held a tabletop, like an emergency management tabletop exercise. And it was kind of framed as like, this is something we want to build and work to, these sorts of exercises facilitate that kind of turn-based stakeholder, all right, at this phase of this specific emergency, we're doing this, and then discussion of like, what other things should happen? The road crew should be notified, they should be, you know, contingent upon the specific event, but checking these likely areas, you know, and all that sort of stuff that's like progressing through the anticipated phases of an emergency response, and then identifying more or less the considerations and then the actual actions tied to those considerations.
And Tom, you're on our town committee. Is this the kind of thing that makes sense for Marshfield and Plainfield to kind of, brainstorm together, do some draft planning together?
I
I mean,
mean,
we'll have our own plans.
yeah, I mean, in terms of, collaboration, right, and like mutual understanding, shared language, shared
Yeah,
You
just
know,
broadening the pie of,
consciousness
sort of
of,
what's
of,
being
hey,
considered.
we're doing this, we expect off of their plans that they're doing this, and then that enhances coordination
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
theory.
We rely on each other. Alrighty, does anyone have any questions about LEMPs, EOPs, HMPs?
If you don't now, you will.
Yeah. What about
I'm sure we have lots
this
of questions.
June 1st event? Oh,
So
I'm
that
sorry,
is-
we're
yeah.
not moving on yet.
We are moving on now.
Okay.
If nobody has any questions about, like,
Oh, I have a million
MPs.
questions. but-
well, there are lots of questions about in this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the
This-
way, I wanted to add to the EOP part of this, that we're heading into fire weather. We remember when Jonathan Matthew was here, he said that spring is when we have the greatest danger of fires. So starting yesterday, I started to get notifications from the state about forest fire danger in the town, in the various parts. There's a lot of fuel out there. The question is, how much rain are we gonna get? The snow is all melted, so that much water has come into the water table and gives us a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah.
But if we don't have a great deal of rain in the next 5 weeks, we actually are in severe forest fire danger. And I should add that, of course, the further south you get, the earlier spring is. And for the first time in 2 decades, South Carolina and North Carolina had an enormous amount of
Yeah.
unexpected
Yeah.
fires
Right about
popping
that.
up all over the state. And if it happens here, we have to be ready for it.
Why this spring? That's counterintuitive.
It's because the dry stuff over the winter, the
Yeah.
dead vegetation and all that actually is, when the trees start blooming and sending their sap up and stuff like that, they're less
There's
burnable.
more
I mean,
moisture on the landscape.
But now a tiny spark would just
Yeah.
start a fire,
Yeah.
if it's
Yeah,
dry
all
enough.
that old vegetation is sort of devoid of moisture,
Before
if
it's
you will.
replaced
Yeah.
with the
Until
moisture.
things start blooming
Yeah.
and turning green and
Rake your forest.
Yeah. I mean,
also start
this
checking
is-
for ticks, everyone. It's
Yeah,
that time of year
oh, that's
again.
Sure is.
well, we develop a strange sense of humor here because we are the people who have to talk about the worst stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah.
right, anybody else would say,
hazards.
well, let's not ruin our party by talking about fires.
Well, it is kind of hard to imagine a fire in
Yeah.
this damp landscape, I don't think of fire as a big danger around here, but we have a lot of woods and a lot of flammable material, so.
It is increasing too.
I actually, Bob Ashington, Bob, he's our energy coordinator, he called me
Oh, yeah,
probably in the middle of December. He said, there's some kind of period where we had not too much rainfall. He said, are we in danger of fire? He says, I'm surrounded by all this stuff, there's deadfall in all the woods.
yep,
He was calling because he thought it was something to be concerned with. So.
yeah.
Yeah, you can really see it right now this time of year too, all the trees that have fallen. Like, even driving on Route 2, there's so many more trees.
Yep,
Our primary wind direction, although it changes, is from the west and northwest, and northwest and west of town are quite a few woods. And the thing about the way Vermont transitioned from being sheep farming with all these open pastures everywhere, last 50 years, we've gone to be 80% forested in Vermont. And that means that forest fires are suddenly something we have to think about. On the
well,
state,
and fire suppression can contribute to worse fires down the road. So anyway.
Yeah.
Fire.
On to discipline,
Wasn't
aren't
floods
disasters.
enough?
No.
yeah, so we've got
Go
a few
hand
more
in
minutes.
hand, yeah. So we'll just go over it really quick. Michael has worked his networking magic and has come up with some really wonderful people, I think, for our spring forum, which will actually be June 1st, which feels very far away from this
Which day
first
is
day of
that?
spring. It is a Sunday.
Okay.
It will be here at the town hall. And of course, anyone on the committee that wants to volunteer to help with chairs and
Town hall or opera?
Opera House
it's
upstairs.
the townhouse / opera house is what this is called.
Okay.
That's the municipal building.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that confused the hell out of me for the first couple
Yeah.
years. I lived here.
I think of it as the opera house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So our main focus will be, of course, addressing the needs of anybody that has any kind of special need within a emergency situation, an emergency event, right? It's not the proper. And so we've got a really wonderful woman from the state emergency management, and then this another woman named Kendra who works at the Special Needs Support Center in White River Junction. And then someone from Washington County Mental Health will specifically talk about anxiety and anger in relation to emergencies, because that's those two emotions that come up. And then we're gonna have like after they do their keynote speaks, we'll break out into sort of like more one-on-one sessions, and we'll have a couple other people that will be able to host some tables, like possibly Jody Velarde, our health officer for the town of Plainfield, will be there to also answer any questions people might have.
By the way, Sid Pollock, who I'd asked to be one of those helpers, has informed me he's not around that weekend, but he's going to suggest somebody else in Vermont Emergency Management. The reason I asked for Sid is because he's been a first responder, he's been an ambulance driver, and he knows what is required when you're pulling somebody out of the house who's in a wheelchair, you know, that kind of thing. But he's going to try and find somebody equivalent.
Wonderful, yeah. Yeah, so our goal is to have possibly, it was about 6 tables, right, Michael?
Six,
like sort of breakout tables for the second half of the session, for people to be able to talk about their own individual, you know, circumstances and get
so
advice.
people just kind of flow from table to table, is that what you guys
Yeah.
envisioned?
That's what we envision.
And also, I think we just discussed a pretty big break between the two parts, like a half an hour, because that'll give people a chance to socialize together a little bit and get the feeling for the lay of the land and whatever. We are not, by the way, restricting this just to Plainfield. We're not reaching out just to Plainfield. This is to central Washington County. So we'll be, when it comes time to do the promotion, I think I'll probably take responsibility for the promotion. When it comes time to do the promotion, I'll be putting it in the Times Argus. I'll be putting it in, you know, the Washington World, you know, that kind of thing.
Select board notification here present. We are, an accessibility commission is coming, and they may want to have anything to say or do with this event.
Alicia is on the call. Alicia, who is one of those people, has been following this meeting.
The town is establishing.
Yeah, like one of our many commissions, a new commission just forming is an accessibility commission to help the town with accessibility issues.
Alicia, do you want to say anything at this point?
Not really. I mean, I've had experience doing this sort of emergency management response in academic institutions, and I've done a lot of accessibility work, but I'm going to be part of the group along with Mary Lane and Dan Fancher, who are the people who've expressed interest so far. I understand the commission will be raised at Monday's select board meeting, and certainly will distribute information about that. And one of the big pieces, as you and I discussed, Michael, is to get people with disabilities, with accessibility needs, who may not think about themselves in that form. We also talked about how disability now refers to all sorts of conditions that affect basic tasks of daily living. To get people who would be assisted in these situations to this meeting, because a lot of it is people with disabilities knowing how to prepare in advance.
Can I clarify, Alicia, can I clarify that
Yeah.
the promotion, and this is not primarily for people who are looking at disabilities. This is for people with disabilities. That's been
Right, correct.
from the very beginning. So we're hoping that in that particular event,
Mhm.
we will be hearing from the people who are doing or not able to do planning in their own homes, and that they will become part of our feedback process, that we will be very actively involving them. I'm hoping.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, as we talked about, the slogan of the disability community is nothing about us without us. Don't plan for us, plan with us, or let us lead the planning. Um, so I think getting the word out to residents of surrounding towns who might benefit from thinking about advanced planning for events none of us really want to contemplate, but have to, will be a part of making this a useful promotion. And I think it's great.
So it sounds like I should send you a copy of this
Sure.
tentative agenda.
Mhm. Okay,
All right.
that would be great.
Alicia,
All right.
what's your last name for my notes?
Weiss, Weiss.
Okay, and by the way, while we're at it, I have George Springston on Zoom and now Alicia. Anybody else on Zoom? Looks like a
Oh,
black
that's not
cat
George
there.
Springston.
Maureen,
That's,
Oh,
and
it's,
it's just,
oh, it's George.
it's just George,
Right.
yeah. And then
Okay,
there's,
sorry.
Maureen has joined in,
Maureen,
no last name.
okay. Okay.
thank
Anybody
you for
else?
serving, Alicia.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Alicia, that's
Yeah.
exciting.
Maybe.
I don't know the cat's name. The cat isn't telling. Okay, but thank you. This is great.
Who
Louis.
the cat was.
The cat's Louis.
Yeah.
Louis.
That's Louis.
Ah, good to know. Duly noted.
And is there gonna be an online part of this, like
Oh,
an accessibility?
yeah, that's a good point.
Mhm.
There are two things that need to be improved on. And what we normally do during bigger meetings of the select board is project the Zoom on a screen. That may work out best for the participants, but it involves better setup. It involves working with the Opera House workers to make sure we have good sound. By the way, if people aren't aware of it, there are sets of extra headphones that are available to be hooked into the sound system, so people with limited hearing can follow the speakers. So, yeah.
I have to go.
Okay.
I have forgotten to do an important thing.
Did you bring that just so that you could put it under the microphone?
No, I just,
That was good thinking, though.
I'm gonna
Thank you, Rose.
take a clean handkerchief and
Thanks for
put it under
coming.
there.
You know, if I could add something, and then I know you folks have a big agenda, and I appreciate that this is being planned. One of the big components of inclusiveness is integrating into every announcement or invitation to an event, and I'm sure you've seen it on various invites, is do you require any accommodations to fully participate in this event?
Yep.
So that we can plan for it. And you know, if we need to caption the screen, if we need to, if somebody needs to bring a service animal that may need, and somebody else has an allergy, these are all things that it's really helpful to know about. But
Yeah.
what it also says to people with disabilities is we thought of you as one of the community, rather than you having to come and perhaps feel awkward, or perhaps feel pissed off and say, hey, I need to be there too. But I do think, and we can talk about this in another point, I do think that making this accessible for people who cannot leave their homes, but may have to leave their homes in an emergency, would be a good idea for some sort of remote option. But I think that requires some conversation. I imagine that requires some conversation with the presenters.
Well, not only that, but amongst our presenters are people with disabilities. So
Right.
what I was anticipating as we get closer is not, they're going to see this agenda tomorrow. I mean, I just wanted the feedback from the committee, and then each of our presenters will get a copy of this tomorrow. I will ask them what language needs to change. I will ask them what additional information should be added, and I will ask them if I've accurately described what it is they intend to do. And Jackie Kelly heads up the office in the Department of Emergency Management that is specifically addressed to meeting the needs of people with disabilities during a disaster. So she's the ideal first person to ask for advice on this.
Would she, do you think she would think to volunteer information about how to make sure this event is accessible, or should we ask her specifically?
Well, that's where we bring in Kendra LaRoche. Kendra's job is helping towns prepare facilities like shelters in this specific case. So that's what she's addressing. She's the second line in our talks. I guess you call these our 3 keynote speakers, supporting persons with special needs in a public shelter. So,
But my question is, you know, as Alicia was saying, getting people here who may have disabilities.
yeah.
I'm wondering if we should ask these folks, you know, how we can be most inclusive.
And their advice on
Basically.
promoting it.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah, and Alicia too. I'm sure once she sees this, you'll have ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've done work on language, and also, I mean, I've consulted with universities and colleges about the language for requesting accommodations so that it's respectful and really inclusive of things we might not know about. One thing I would like to, and I guess I could communicate perhaps with someone, one of the presenters, but I suspect they'll think about this, is making sure that any materials that are going to be distributed are available in alternative formats. Not everybody can see, not everybody reads, not everybody hears. So I don't know if there'll be materials that are distributed, but there's nothing worse than having a supposedly inclusive disability event and suddenly there are people who are either blind or visually impaired enough that they can't read font, 12 font print, being handed something that doesn't include them.
Yes, and we will face obstacles in that direction unless we find unless working from a list far enough in advance of what kind of specific and I would say limitations that we will encounter for individual people, that when we reach the point where we, for instance, have to tape record everything and distribute that as a link that people can go to after the event. If they didn't hear it, they can hear it.
Right.
But at the time of the event, because we're just a little committee in a tiny little town with 1,200 people, is that with very little budget, is that we can't hire somebody to do this for us. So we either have to find volunteers or people who will give gifts so that we can accomplish the costs involved. But we do very much want to do a good job in the sense of making sure that, as you say, Alicia, the language is inclusive and it can be participated in by everybody.
I do have one suggestion. I'm colorblind, so text on colored backgrounds is a bad thing.
Oh, I hate it too, for different reasons, but no, we do try to keep everything just basic black and white, and
Yeah, I very much appreciate these.
and you can probably see that I tend to distribute stuff that's at least 16 point type or
Right. And another thing and these folks will be aware of this, but people often feel that the jazzier if they're using PowerPoint or something, which of course has to be voiced. If you're going to use slides, you have to describe. If you're doing an accessible presentation, you describe what's on them, you describe the visual information. You don't have to read them, but you describe what is critical. In other words, if you have a little widget that's decorative, you don't have to describe that, but you describe critical information. But that people often think that the jazzier the visual presentation, the better. And not only do you want to make sure that people with differences in color vision can see the critical information, but you want to make sure that you don't give people seizures with some of these, things that zip in and out.
Alicia, just want to first of all say, yes, look at our list of presenters. Once I sent this to you, you will see these are people that really, they would never even think for a second to do something.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they'll be aware of it.
But the other thing I wanted to make sure you understood is that because we are going to be doing a Zoom meeting, In other words, making it possible for people to participate from home.
Mhm.
We're not going to be using the screen for presentation.
Right, true.
Yeah, so I have to
Yeah.
ask our presenters not to do a PowerPoint presentation.
Mhm.
Everything will be verbal, and then there will be hearing aid from what presently exists in the hall for hearing assistance. And there, and there will also be post-event recordings for people who didn't hear everything clearly. So that's the best of what, I mean, we're not tonight, by the way, trying to solve this. We're just
Right,
looking ahead at who we can consult, and the first people I will be consulting are our presenters.
Yeah.
And yourself, once you see this, you will also probably have good feedback for me. So for Maggie and I, who've been planning this, we know we're only starting. You know, and we've got, if we say June 1st, that's less than 2.5 months ago away, you know, so.
Yeah, right.
but it's good it's in the spring. I mean, I've coordinated events where we're trying to get people from all over with disabilities, some of the mobility related from all over Vermont, you know, to Montpelier in February. This is better.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, the other thing that I can say is that our one handicapped accessible space in front of the building will be painted by that time. In other words, we'll have it striped. It is one space, and one of the biggest,
Yeah.
now where there was no space, I mean, it said there was a space, wasn't really. So now we have one space. It's going to have to be, and it's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but people, because we are expecting multiple people with disabilities who, that we will have to ask the people, request help taking their vehicle. If they come in a vehicle and they are self-driving, that they'll have to ask someone to drive the vehicle across the street and park it.
Street.
Because the next person coming along needs to get into the same space. So we'll work out some kind of valet parking as well.
I would also suggest that, and again, this is, I'm getting in the weeds, but it's what I do, sorry. You can tell me to be quiet, but that we think about asking for some volunteers to assist people in getting into the building. People who, I've known people who are self-driving but had difficulty transferring into a chair. Our entrance isn't, you know, we don't have automatic doors. And so just to help people feel that this is, you know, this is not a struggle for them to be here.
Well, right at the moment, there are 2 people with disabilities on this committee, and until about 4 or 5 months ago, also a person who used a motorized wheelchair. And I knew the importance of assisting her because it made it possible for her to get in. But we also have a modification of the building that will happen over the next 2 months. Means getting out front with a grinder, but to bring down the area immediately in front of the door sill, and then putting an extended ramps type sill for the 1.5-inch rise that comes into the building in the first place. It will be warm enough that we'll be able to leave the doors propped open.
Great.
And we will definitely have a volunteer also running the lift, which is it works, but it requires intervention. There's some kind of call button thing that isn't working, and I've asked them to fix it, and it still hasn't happened. I don't have control over that. I don't actually run this building. So I have an office in the building, but I don't run it, and there are a group of people who are responsible for fixing stuff. So we'll hope that'll all be taken care of. I don't think we should get into any more detail than
I'm
that.
gonna have to go, my computer's about to die.
Yeah, we've got to bring the meeting to an end.
Thank you so much, Alicia.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks,
Thank
Alicia.
All right, and I adjourn. Called adjourn at 8:45.
And I second.
It's a little better than last time.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
It's a good meeting.
Yeah, covered a lot.
Going on in this little town, and in the little town of Marshfield.
Even together, we're still a little town.
What's next on your plate, Tom, as far as stuff like this?
We are.
Oops, I gotta end the recording, sorry.
Like a, further developing a resilience hub, which is kind of a multifaceted project, but that is looking at both kind of sunny day resilience as far as